Give us $30,000 as a gift for our new home. If you can't pay, just go back home, old hag.
That's what my daughter-in-law said at the entrance when my husband and I arrived to celebrate my son's new house. At that moment, memories of past events flashed through my mind like a slideshow. This daughter-in-law is hopeless. I genuinely thought so from the bottom of my heart. We stood frozen at the entrance. When I looked up at my husband, Ted, he seemed so exasperated he couldn't even speak. "Shall we go home?" I muttered, and Ted nodded. As we walked away, my daughter-in-law laughed triumphantly at our retreating figures. She'll realize that her laughter is short-lived soon enough. My name is Susan Matthews, and I'm a 63-year-old housewife. Until I retired at 60, I worked as an office clerk at a nearby church. Now, I teach pottery, a practice I've continued since my youth, at home. My husband, Ted, took early retirement from his company and now teaches local gardening classes, a hobby he picked up. We both turned our passions into our jobs. You could say we live a carefree and comfortable life. We have only one child, our son. Our only son, Jack, has been exceptionally smart since childhood, often called a prodigy. Neither Ted nor I have high academic backgrounds. Ted's late father was a university professor, so we think Jack's intelligence might be inherited from him. It was common for us to be flustered by Jack's challenging questions. Since childhood, Jack had firmly declared, "I will become a doctor." True to his word, he effortlessly achieved his dream. To be honest, sending Jack to medical school was expensive, and there were times when we really had to pinch pennies. Still, we worked hard for Jack's dream. Now, Ted and I can laugh about those days, and it feels strange. Jack, who became the doctor he dreamed of being since childhood, lives in the next city, about an hour away from us. He works at a university-affiliated hospital and seems to have a pretty tough job. I can't help but worry, thinking of him handling a demanding job all alone, away from his family. I hoped he would get married soon and give us some peace of mind. Although we never directly told him, it was a heartfelt wish of ours. Recently, our wish came true. It's been 3 years since he married Emily, a nurse who worked at the same hospital. Though it's a bit lonely that he doesn't visit home often due to his busy job, I'm glad he's not single anymore. That's what I thought. However, our peaceful life is now troubled by our daughter-in-law, Emily. When Jack informed us about his marriage, it was quite sudden. I had always told him to introduce any woman he was dating, and Jack would occasionally bring his girlfriend home. But this time, he hadn't brought her home even once. Of course, we hadn't been introduced to her either. You never mentioned you were seeing someone, and now you're suddenly getting married. Is there a reason to rush the wedding? Noticing Jack's unusual demeanor, I asked. For once, Jack hesitated. I quickly sensed he was hiding something from me. Is she pregnant? My motherly intuition kicked in, and I pressed him. Jack, looking a bit troubled, admitted, "Yes, she is." From his tone, I sensed he wasn't entirely convinced. What's wrong? If you seem unsure, it will make her anxious. Be more decisive. You're going to be a father. My voice rose in response to Jack's indecisiveness. I never raised my son to be a man who would leave a woman uncertain after getting her pregnant.
You're right. Yeah, I need to take responsibility for my child.
Jack muttered as if shaking off something. I remember feeling immensely relieved that my son wasn't turning into a lowly man. From there, the lead up to the wedding was hectic. In the end, Emily, the bride-to-be, never even greeted us before the wedding. Even when we asked her to show her face, she said, "I'm in the early stages of pregnancy," and didn't come to see us. I worried if she was having severe morning sickness, and asked Jack about it. But Jack's response was, "She's perfectly fine." Moreover, despite not coming to greet us, we heard rumors that she was off on premarital and bachelorette trips. The thought of Emily becoming Jack's wife gave me a sense of foreboding. Ultimately, my husband and I met Emily on the wedding day. She greeted us with a bright, friendly smile, but there was no apology for not having greeted us earlier. She didn't even introduce us to her parents. Was she just being rude or what? Feeling exasperated, I nudged Jack, and we somehow managed to greet her parents. Even then, another incident that rubbed me the wrong way occurred. We had heard that both of Emily's parents were local government employees. Given their serious jobs, I imagined them to be respectable people, but my expectations were quickly dashed. "I'm sorry for the late introduction." When I apologized saying that, Emily's mother replied, "Yes, indeed." For a moment, I couldn't believe my ears. Ted also stiffened for a moment, clearly surprised. I gathered myself and asked about the baby. It was also Jack's responsibility that Emily became pregnant before the wedding. I had heard Emily was quitting her nursing job due to the pregnancy and marriage, and I felt a personal responsibility as Jack's mother. But the words from Emily's mother were shocking. Emily wasn't pregnant after all. She laughed and said it was a case of imagined pregnancy. I hadn't heard anything about that. In a panic, I confirmed with Jack, who also responded in surprise, "What?" This raised the suspicion that perhaps they knew it was a false pregnancy from the start. However, it was already the wedding day. Even if it was discovered now, it was too late. Jack sighed resignedly.
I would have proposed sooner or later without such a lie.
Jack's face darkened slightly at the thought of his marriage beginning with a lie. A little distance away, Emily was chatting happily with her friends. I overheard her boasting proudly to her friends, "I became a nurse to marry a doctor." She even said loudly, "It's a golden ticket, so I'll never have to worry about money." To blatantly say such things in a public place is just too vulgar. It's as if Jack's only worth is his money. It's beyond rude. Noticing my furrowed brow at Emily's words, Jack gave a slightly troubled smile.
She has her cute moments, too.
Jack whispered to me, trying to defend Emily. I could only think that she was taking advantage of his kindness. I sighed, realizing there were tough times ahead. After the wedding, I completely lost contact with Jack. Emily forced Jack to cancel his old phone, and apparently, he got a new number. Later, I found out that Emily had blocked my number on Jack's phone. She would check all of Jack's calls, and if she found out he was in touch with me, she would throw a hysterical fit. At first, Jack still tried to keep in touch. But after Emily caused such a scene that the police had to be called, Jack stopped contacting us altogether. From then on, any communication with Jack had to go through Emily. Emily continued to act in ways that slowly drove a wedge between me and Jack. She seemed to get along well with her own parents. Jack recalled how they always tagged along whenever they went out, making their early married life difficult. One such episode involved their honeymoon. They didn't go on a honeymoon right after the wedding. They postponed it because Emily claimed to be pregnant. After the wedding, Emily shamelessly admitted to Jack that it was a false pregnancy. Given that it was such a shock, maybe it was for the best that she told him after some time had passed. Jack told me that right after explaining she wasn't pregnant, Emily begged to go on a honeymoon. Well, if she's not pregnant, you should go somewhere as a couple to celebrate your marriage. We'll cover the travel expenses as a wedding gift, I said, trying to cheer up a somewhat deflated Jack. A month later, the two went on their honeymoon. As promised, my husband and I paid for the trip as a wedding gift. By the way, there was no word of thanks from Emily for covering the travel expenses. I only found out after they returned that Emily's parents went on the trip with them. No wonder the travel costs Emily requested were so high. In our naivety, we ended up paying for Emily's parents' trip as well. We couldn't exactly ask for the money back, so we just had to swallow our pride and accept it. And we didn't even get any souvenirs. Jack had left everything to Emily, so he didn't realize we hadn't received any. He didn't know her parents were coming until they met at the airport. It was just one thing after another, and I couldn't bring myself to like Emily. We didn't openly fight, but we definitely avoided each other. 3 years passed without much contact, and there were no grandchildren either. One day, Jack called to tell me they had built a new home. He sneakily used his work phone to call me, which was endearing. When I asked for details, I learned the new house was a mansion. He told me it cost over $1 million, and I was stunned.
As we included more and more of Emily's demands, the costs just kept rising.
Jack said with a bit of a troubled look. He then invited us to come and see the new house, saying they were having a housewarming party. This was the first time since their wedding that we'd be visiting them, and I felt a bit excited. Emily's grandmother, whom I hadn't met, because she was hospitalized during the wedding, would also be there. I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk with her family. "All right, we'll come by," I replied, never imagining what would happen next. On the day of the housewarming, Ted and I stood outside the mansion, our mouths agape. We knew it was going to be big, but it was far beyond our expectations. We knew they had a good income. But still, this was something else. With trembling hands, I rang the doorbell, and Emily's voice came through the intercom. When Emily greeted us at the door, she looked a bit plumper than she did at the wedding. She must be taking it easy after quitting her demanding job. Her nails were long, perfectly manicured with gel polish. Clearly not suited for housework. Looking down the hallway, I saw 3 women in aprons bustling about.
Oh, those are the maids. I'm terrible at housework.
Emily, who had quickly noticed that I had seen the women in the back, said with a smile. Apparently, they've had maids since the beginning of their marriage.
Having skilled people do the housework is better for both me and Jack. Trying to do what I'm bad at just leads to failure.
Emily explained her philosophy, clearly taking advantage of their wealth. Meanwhile, Ted and I were still standing in the doorway, being looked down upon by Emily. "Emily, may we come in?" I asked with a forced smile. Emily then said something unbelievable.
If you want to come in, you need to give us a housewarming gift. The amount is $30,000.
Emily said with a malicious grin. For a moment, I couldn't understand what she was saying. Seeing our confusion, Emily repeated impatiently.
Give us $30,000 as a gift for our new home. If you can't pay, just go back home, old hag.
Emily repeated mockingly, and I felt more exasperated than angry. I glanced at Ted, who was shaking his head with his eyes downcast. A gesture he made when he was utterly exasperated. I tugged on Ted's sleeve with a bitter smile. "Shall we go home?"
Yeah.
Hearing Ted's response, I glared at Emily. She didn't look intimidated at all. "We're leaving, but consider this the end of our relationship. We're cutting ties from now on." I said this and left the mansion. Emily had no idea what kind of chaos her actions would bring. I heard her laughing hysterically behind me. It was a wasted trip. I said to Ted in the car on the way back. "Really?" he replied. I felt a sticky kind of exhaustion, completely drained. I couldn't even see Jack's face. And that was the only regret. About 20 minutes into the drive, my phone rang. It was Emily. What more could she possibly want? I didn't want to answer, but I did anyway. "Hey, do you still need something?" I said coldly. I heard sniffling on the other end of the line, sobbing and hiccuping. It sounded like Emily was crying like a child. "Emily, are you crying?" It wasn't out of concern, just a confirmation.
Susan, please come back immediately. I'm begging you.
Her attitude had done a complete 180, and I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear. Her pleading screams were more shocking than surprising. Where did all that bravado go? I can't pay $30,000, and even if I went back, you'd just turn me away at the door. Enough with the mockery. I said we're cutting ties. Hearing my words, Emily's crying grew louder.
Grandma knows you, Susan. She got really angry. I'm so scared of her.
Emily's explanation was incoherent, filling my mind with questions. I had never met Emily's grandmother. Being scared of your grandmother's anger, stop acting like a child. Take responsibility for your words. You're an adult now. I was so irritated by her continued crying that I raised my voice. Then I heard a low, commanding voice of an older woman behind Emily, telling her to apologize sincerely. Listening closely, I suddenly realized, Emily's grandmother, is she by any chance Mrs. Barbara Streisand? Barbara Streisand is an elderly lady who has been taking pottery lessons from me. In a sense, she is my apprentice. She started learning pottery later in life and, despite being older than me, always respected me as her teacher. She had endured many hardships in her younger years, making her a rather formidable and cool lady. If she were truly angry, it would indeed be terrifying. Now I understood why Emily was crying and calling in fear.
I didn't know you were my grandmother's teacher, Susan. Please come back. Otherwise, I'll be kicked out of the house.
Even though she was pleading through her tears, my resolve didn't change. I told you we're cutting ties, didn't I? Do you not understand what that means? My phone's about to die, so I'm hanging up now. I said this and ended the call. Of course, my phone still had over 90% battery left. It wasn't the phone's battery that was about to die, but my patience. On the way home, my phone kept ringing. It was so noisy and annoying that I turned it off. Does she think everything will be forgiven if she cries? I said to Ted, who was driving, and he replied calmly, maybe so. It seemed the phone call had somehow calmed Ted down. He had a gentle nature, and his anger never lasted long.
Jack is probably already on his way back home,
Ted said with a chuckle. While I was arguing with Emily at the door, Ted noticed that Jack was listening to our conversation from the next room.
There's no way he would want to stay married to her after that,
Ted said, knowing Jack's personality well and predicting that he would pack up and come back home.
Definitely. Answer Emily's call one more time.
At Ted's suggestion, I turned my phone back on. Immediately, the ringtone blared. Emily, you're being persistent.
Susan. I'm sorry. What can I do to be forgiven? Jack.
Emily's voice was even more frantic than before. It sounded like she was outside, with traffic noises in the background. What's happened to Jack? It was hard to hear her through the noise.
Jack left. He handed me divorce papers. I tried to chase his car, but I couldn't catch up. Please tell Jack and my grandma it was all a joke. Please, everything will be okay, if you say that.
Crying, Emily kept repeating, please. She seemed to be wandering around in the cold, searching for Jack's car, her footsteps dragging. I felt a little sorry for her, but remembering everything that had happened, I couldn't forgive her. This is all your own doing, Emily. Do you know the term you reap what you sow? Your grandmother, Barbara, is a very polite person. Don't you realize you've brought disgrace to her too? Hearing my harsh words, Emily seemed too exhausted to argue back, and all I could hear was her sniffling. But of course, Emily wasn't one to leave it at that. She quickly regained her composure and threw back a defiant statement.
But, I haven't done anything wrong. We built a mansion worth over $1 million. Bringing $30,000 as a housewarming gift is the least you could do. It's you and Ted who are being unreasonable. Isn't cutting ties overreacting?
I was utterly appalled by Emily's lack of remorse. How could she claim she had done nothing wrong in this situation? I couldn't understand her at all. I'm certain I'll never truly understand Emily. I'm sorry, Emily, I'm tired of talking to you. You need to reflect sincerely on your mistakes for the rest of your life. If you can't do that, your life is over. I said my final words to Emily, whom I would never speak to again, and hung up the call. As soon as I did, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. When we saw the lights of our home, Ted said triumphantly, "See, I told you." Jack's car was parked in the driveway. "You're right, you were spot on," I said, impressed, and Ted smiled happily. In the end, Jack and Emily got divorced. There must have been a lot on Jack's mind. Jack's retribution was merciless. He explained to the lawyer that their marriage was based on the premise that Emily was pregnant. Apparently, she had shown him an ultrasound photo, which turned out to be her friend's. In the end, Jack had been completely deceived. He decided to sue for damages for that lie. Emily had accumulated significant debt during her single days due to her spending habits, and Jack had paid it all off when they got married. He demanded repayment for that as well. The total amount of alimony and debt repayment was substantial. Still, Jack was determined not to relent. Moreover, Emily had secretly planned to have her parents move into the mansion with them. Her parents had even put their house up for sale in anticipation. The mansion was in Jack's name, and there was still a mortgage on it. Even if there were property division, Emily had no means to pay the monthly mortgage. Emily and her parents ended up homeless. It all started with Emily's lies. While you could say it was her own fault, the price she paid was too high. I heard that Emily and her parents moved into her grandmother Barbara's house and were living in a rented room. Barbara told me, "I'll straighten out my granddaughter's character." Under the strict guidance of Barbara, who is very particular about manners, Emily was likely receiving harsh training. To repay her debts, Emily had returned to working as a nurse. Due to the widespread bad rumors, she couldn't return to her old hospital and had to commute to 1 hour away by train. We sold our old, dilapidated house. Jack had invited us to live with him in the mansion. Renovating the mansion, which had been decorated entirely to Emily's taste, took some time, but the result was astonishing. To accommodate Ted's gardening hobby, Jack bought the adjacent land and created a large garden, telling us, "Make it your own." Ted and I were speechless with surprise. Jack even set up a pottery kiln for me. Jack said it was just filial piety, but I couldn't thank him enough. I imagine he will remarry someday. Until then, being able to live together again is what makes me the happiest. I want to cherish this unexpected happiness and nurture it.